Oh, yeah, right.
You are here, yes. Thought I can hide over there. You're hiding when you're in the panel.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. And thanks, everybody. I'm Dan Lamb. I'm Chief Executive of the Arbor Day Foundation. The Arbor Day Foundation is an international nonprofit organization. We have a very simple mission. We inspire people to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees. And that's what we do. Yeah. And we plant trees in cities and towns, which is exciting of this conversation about urban work. And we do replanting in large scale reforestation in about 50 countries around the globe. But we're excited to keep the conversation going around nature-based solutions and excited to have this panel here to talk about how it ties into cities and specifically some of the most vulnerable parts of our cities. And so we may be joined by a keynote speaker a little bit later, but we'll start off with the panel conversations and I'll introduce each of the speakers and then start with a question for each of you. And then we'll just go into dialogue. And you may have questions for each other as well as we're going along. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with Siren, Program Management Officer, UN Habitat, the flagship coordinator for the Rise Up program. Then we've got Norihiro Kimura, the Senior Negotiator for Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry of Japan. Thanks for joining us. And Imen, Senior Climate Change Specialist from Tunisia. So thank you all for joining. And I've got a couple just starter questions to get started. And when you start, just take some time to introduce yourself a little bit more, if you don't mind, for my sake and for others and those who may be listening. So Siren, as a Rise Up coordinator, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the program and how the program, the tools that are available for national governments, for local governments to engage in this, and let's just start there. Oh, you got one.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me here and for the organizers to bring us all together. Yes, my name is Serene Karikadata. I'm Program Management Officer, as said. Rise Up is a flagship program, stands for Resilient Settlements of the Urban Poor. And it is basically an attempt to redirect redirect climate finance to large-scale investment. So what that means in detail is that we've noticed that there is a climate finance gap on the local level. In particular, there's a climate finance gap when it comes to financing communities and financing informal settlements. And so with the actually great help from the Adaptation Fund, who is the core donor to the Rise Up program, we were able to set in place multi-level vulnerability analyses, so to identify hotspots of vulnerability, and then based on the hotspots of vulnerability, and for us, these were focusing on layers like urban issues, climate change issues, biodiversity degradation. So to then basically understand with the funding that comes from climate finance that we can access, where do we prioritize our investments so it makes the most sense for the ones that are the most vulnerable. So that's basically what Rise Up is as an identity. And then we scale that up through funding also with the GCF readiness, but also bilateral donors such as ACID and CEDA. We scale that up through, I think by now, over 28 countries, starting since 2019. And we're a small agency. One needs to know that as well. And yeah, so now we have that approach and methodology that integrates also green and blue infrastructure solutions into the common resilience approach that you would do. And a lot of that is nature-based solution. And that's, I think, also why I'm here today. Yeah.
And I'll come back to this with everyone about how we're seeing a change in pace and attention to urban work. I'll do a follow-up on that. Okay. So as leader for Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry, you're working primarily with the private sector on nature-based solutions. It'd be great for us to understand some of the best practices and experiences you're having as you're engaging the private sector in urban work.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me as a speaker here. My name is Norihiro Kimura. I'm Senior Negotiator for Climate Change from Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Let me first introduce what I'm doing daily. In my mission, yeah, although I'm called a senior negotiator, but my daily life is supporting a Japanese company who are doing a business on mitigation and adaptation in a developing country. And of course, on the adaptation area, I'm feeling that still raising awareness is needed because although Japanese companies are doing a various business, in agriculture and food and water, but in some cases, in many cases, they don't recognize that will contribute adaptation. Yeah. So what we are doing is we collect very excellent technologies and publish it as a leaflet, and for raising awareness of of course, domestic in Japan, and also we using such catalog to advertise to the developing country. And from a developing country viewpoint, although they have to take a adaptation measure to address their climate issue, but they don't recognize Japanese companies' technologies from private sectors. So I'm feeling that it's important to outreach local government directly to let them know about technologies. And actually, collaboration with UN Habitat is very much super and wonderful for us to reach local government in the Asia Pacific region. Hoshino-san is not here, but actually our best friend in UN Habitat in the Asia Pacific region, Hoshino-san, kindly introduced us to their regional office in 17 countries. And we provide, as I said, we publish leaflet and technology. So we share the catalog to these 17 countries. And actually 4 local government from Asia Pacific region have an interest. And the UN Habitat and METI held a business matching event in Japan last September. And we invited 6 Japanese companies and 4 local government joined the meeting. And they both made presentation. Company provide their technology information, and the local government provide their adaptation needs. And after that, we conducted a site visit, so that Japanese companies actually show their technologies at the plant. As a result, we are doing follow-up activities, but one local government invite one Japanese companies for a demonstration of technologies. I think this kind of process is very important. Whenever local government want to introduce technology, but they don't know what it is, and of course, if the stage is forwarded, but still finance issue is there. So let's start demonstration. Yeah, so this is why we are starting with demonstration is like that. So they once they introduce technologies, they are testing. And of course, the testing go well or bad, but the kind of trial error is important first step for technology transfer. And as for nature-based solution, I think, you mentioned reforestation and forestation. Actually, we have a contact with one Japanese company, Sumitomo Forestry. They are doing their project to prevent peatland fire by introducing their water management technologies of the peatland. Yeah, actually, maybe water management technology will control the amount of water of the peatland so that we can prevent fire of the peatland. And once fire happen, there are so huge amount of CO2 emitted. So of course, this technology will also contribute to mitigation also. And of course, we protect nature in Indonesia, and this is actually a place as a one of the important cooperative activities between Japan and Indonesia. Yeah, that's our example. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Imen, you've been working in adaptation for more than 15 years. You've learned a lot, seen a lot, and I wonder if you can share with us, there's loads of research around it. What are the biggest challenges from moving from research to action?
Thanks. So my name is Imen Melian, and I am from Tunisia, but I also work for the Adaptation Fund, which is one of the funding mechanisms of the convention. And in the fund, I have been working in nature-based solution from my time in IUCN to shifting to agencies working in the ground to now shifting to funders. So I've seen the spectrum precisely from moving to research-based organization to what the funder is asking in terms of how do we enable scaling up the solution. One of the things that's interesting is how effective is the nature-based solution. And sometimes the research gets to bits and pieces of that and through a particular lens. But when you put it in a more complex environment and you see more variable in a dynamic setting of developing urbanization, of evolving climate impacts, of changing habits of the users, that variability and the complexity of that variability as you translate something on the ground and you try to scale it up, that's where it becomes challenging. And following all the variables on the along the same times, doing some of the modeling, it's so the interest of moving more towards the ground and having that scaling up is to try to capture what worked, what didn't work in a changing environment. And particularly for nature-based solutions, one of the new challenges that we see is the limits to adaptation. So a couple of things in that. One is when you start to put nature-based solutions, say you're planting mangroves for coastal protection, you're planting them today, but the mangrove, to be fully effective, it needs 15 to 20 years for it to grow and so on. Same for coral reefs, for example. So in that time, you need to complement with other things. But then by those 15 years, the climate would have changed. And so this is what we're seeing is post the projects, what's the effectiveness? And this is where, so for example, in the Adaptation Fund, we're adding an ex-post evaluation 5 years under the projects, how things are going. Because as we move forward with adaptation, providing that variable is very important. What's effective and what's not, what has worked and what's not, and why. So I can talk more about that, but I'll stop here for now because yeah.
Well, I would love to hear more about that. Let me ask you, I feel you've all been working in nature-based solutions and adaptation for some time. I feel like there's more and more conversation about what's happening in cities and towns. I don't know if you're feeling that. I feel like there's more conversation about it this COP. In your experiences, I know you've been working in it for a long time, but do you feel like there's more attention? Do you feel like there's more urgency because of how it's impacting people's lives, and not just people, but the most vulnerable communities? And if you don't mind just reacting to that a little bit on how you're seeing the pace and attention pick up around urban climate resilience versus broader landscape resilience.
No, excellent question, definitely. So we have reached the tipping point where 55% of the world's population are urban. We have said many times that if we want to tackle climate change, then we need to have it actually tackled in cities so that GHG emission that comes from cities can be reduced as one of the core point, while also actually cities can contribute to a fast resilience. Then you have 1 billion people in informal settlements. They don't live somewhere in rural areas. They're migrate to cities for job opportunities, livelihood opportunities. You have seen here at COP, but also the COP before, that there is a shift in the language in terms of like how important it is to reflect those 55%. And by 2030, we have 2.5 billion more people in cities. So to reflect it in our discussions early, last year we had our first ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate change, bringing ministers that are not line ministers to the UNFCCC, such as urban line ministers, transport, mobility, urban development, local development, bring them to the talks here at COP and let them have a voice here as well to influence the negotiation documents. And this year we had over 58 ministers or vice ministers present at the second ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate change. So to have an outcome document that actually influences now the negotiations. And until today, there is still that, unfortunately, disconnect for multi-level governance, that disconnect that you need to go beyond the Ministry of Environment or whoever is your negotiator that sits at COP. It needs to be a negotiation or a reflection of subnational governments. It needs to be a reflection across your ministries, because climate change is not only anymore an environmental issue. It is, we have seen it all. It's so anthropocentric. It affects us all. It also doesn't affect only anymore the most vulnerable. It affects all of us, but it affects the most vulnerable the most. So we need to start with them first. And I had also mentioned before, you asked me from research to action, like what is UN Habitat doing there? So of course, you all know we have the NDCs, and we have done an assessment on how many of these NDCs are actually urban. And 2/3 of those NDCs have urban content in them, but only less than 20 of those NDCs have costed and defined action for urban, to address urban climate change. That's not enough if you have 55% of the world's population living in cities. The second is the national adaptation plans. They are based on vulnerability analysis that are nationally done. If I look at Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan has 9 different climatic zones. If I look at Colombia, 35 different climatic zones. If I don't take vulnerability to the ground and identify it on what is really on the ground on local level, then I'm missing out what is national adaptation. That doesn't reflect anymore the vulnerabilities that are there, and that needs to be linked. So I guess it is coming. We need to do more, and definitely some of us, all of us, are drumming the drum first. Yeah. Thank you.
So just to complement what Cyrene has said, we're seeing it also in our portfolio in the Adaptation Fund. I mean, our portfolio earlier was very focused on agriculture, food security, water, but more and more we're seeing more complex urban projects. And one of the points that we're seeing is that also the cities are connecting to the peri-urban and the rural environment, because many of the solutions for the cities lie outside the cities, particularly when we are talking about water or floods. And just to plug another UN Habitat projects in Penang, you know, they're tackling flood management within the city, but also outside the city. Also, we've seen water is a big challenge, and water provisions for the cities, but the water is not going to come from within the city. So you have to look at that landscape environment, and it's really good that the cities are also starting to look at it that way. So I think we're seeing that evolution. It's become and it's becoming more sophisticated. The quality of the projects are also evolving to address the complexity. So that's good.
Thank you very much. Actually, what I thought from your comment is, as I said, as a government, national government, we have various cooperation channel with national government in the developing country, but we don't usually have a connection to local city and government usually. So that's why we collaborate with UN Habitat in Asia Pacific regional office, and actually UN Habitat kindly share their channel to the local government and city. And actually I attended environment event, business matching event in Fukuoka last September. But I heard from each local government that they are doing what kind of issue they are tackling, and this is not, as you said, national adaptation plan, climate change strategy are there, but they are doing at the second level more details, strategies, and implementing plan. So I was able to know such a plan, and actually that's its actual needs, concrete needs for the adaptation measures, and any other, of course, mitigation also they have. And of course, from our side, as I said, companies, I introduced Japanese companies, 6 companies, and they have various expertise on agriculture and composite, and they are doing recycling from the bricks to they produce brick to payment, road payment, and of course, and also they are providing kind of a basic technology which store the rainfall water, and they they change water to the drinking water. Yeah, that's very basic, but the kind of technology are welcome in a local government in developing country. So what I want to say is, local government has various needs, and what I thought is, we want to reach directly to such a needs so that we can provide concrete action and the solution to them. So, and also in terms of urban development issues, yes, for example, I talked with Laripto cities vice mayor in Nepal, and she told me they're trying to introducing a composite plant by using waste. So waste management is the biggest issue for them. So of course they have various issues, but what she highlighted is waste management is a prioritized area. So if so, we can provide such a prioritized areas, specific technologies. That kind of communication and matching is important. That's what I think. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear you working with the private sector, finding the resources with UN Habitat, and working that public-private sector. And I know we've talked and we've seen more city leaders of all levels in this COP. I think we have in many years, if ever. What action item, what are you hoping to take away from this COP as it relates to systemic urban climate resilience for most vulnerable communities? But what is it from this COP that you are hoping to take away, the action item, the connection? Is there something key that you're trying to take away from this COP?
Tough question, because about COPs, it's always, one could say, incremental, right? So you can hope for the best, but the success is incremental. But this incremental success really still matters. We wouldn't have the Rio Declaration without the incremental success. We wouldn't have had Kyoto Protocol without it. We wouldn't have had Paris. So it is maybe late in terms of like the climate emergency, but it is in multilateral process of parties, and therefore maybe the expectations are not maybe aligned with what actually is needed. So I give that as a disclaimer. But if there is something that we could kind of hope for, then I would love to see the linkage between, how many is it? 66 CHAMP endorsers now? The CHAMP endorsing partners putting their language for locally led adaptation, for LGMA, for the subnational governments, give that a clear mandate for multi-level governance and action in the outcome document. That would empower so much. That would empower all the mayors that came, the 200 mayors that came, that it would empower them to also reflect any other communities from the ground. That would be maybe one very, very humble request.
So I wouldn't want to comment on the negotiation, and Ambassador Diane, you may want to ask her that question as to what are you expecting from this COP. But now we're winding towards the end of the COP. What has been interesting for us to see is the level of commitment and action from non-state actors. And it really became more visible perhaps at this COP, perhaps because of the scale of it, but it was really inspiring to see the various actions. As a funder for adaptation, we really hope that the finance for adaptation and that Glasgow Pact is materialized for doubling finance to adaptation. From where we sit, we see the need, we see the increased demand in our portfolio, and it's important that that is provided so that the action on the ground goes. As the Adaptation Fund, we've been listening a lot to what people need, and Serene, you've mentioned briefly locally led adaptation, and how do we help channel the money to the local actors to the ground, and this is why the Adaptation Fund is opening new funding modalities to enable locally led adaptation. After this session, I'm running down up actually one floor up for a consultation we're having with the local actors on how can we channel the funding to you, how best can we do it, what should we design, what should we be looking for. And I know that the local government, cities are an important local actor, so I would ask you to join that at 11 if possible. And that's something, yeah, follow me, that would be great.
So thank you very much. As I'm also engaged in a negotiation, so but also as I said, as my current position, I'm promoting a project and action on the ground. So what I'm always thinking is how to link with these two, because usually, yeah, what we are discussing on the negotiation is a very high level, and sometimes vague, and doesn't necessarily direct to the developing a concrete project. So what I'm thinking right now during a joining negotiation is, for example, we are discussing GST, Global Stock Take right now. Yeah, it's a discussion is getting very tense and very. But for example, what we discussed today, like how to involve private sector, how to accelerate concrete action based on the Glasgow Pact. And that kind of issue is, if you see the 20 pages draft of GST, yeah, you can find involvement private sector, how to accelerate action. And also like even for mitigation, you can find energy issue, how to triple renewable, doubling energy efficiency, phase out coal, and others. So I think this is a one change compared to the pact, compared to the past. Like, yeah, 5 years ago, we cannot see a renewable and energy efficiency and action. We cannot see these words in the decision. But now we are discussing these issues directly linked to the concrete action. So my expectation is, yes, maybe as a result, my expectation is as a result of GST negotiation, we can find so many elements of the concrete action in the decision. So so that we can follow up these decisions from next year. And of course, we can use this decision to accelerate our actions on the ground. That is my expectation.
Thank you. Well, before we introduce the ambassador to make some comments, I was wondering if there's any questions from the audience that anyone may have for the panelists. Actually, you might just have to speak up. I don't want to, I don't want to unplug it.
I wrote it down, otherwise I'm really bad at these. Here's a problem. Oh. For online. Thank you. My name is Nora. I work for IIED, and we really stress the importance of channeling decision-making power and resources and funds to the local level to support locally led action. And I know Adaptation Fund is a signatory to that, to the principles. And I know that you mentioned the importance of bringing funds to the local level and ensuring that they reach the local level. But I also wanted to hear from you on how you thought best to ensure that the needs, demands, and priorities of local communities, especially the most vulnerable, are adhered to in decision-making when it comes to nature-based solutions in urban settings. Thank you.
Sure. You're talking about the designs of the projects in particular. That's what we would like to enable more. I mean, one of the first principles of the LLA is to devolve the decision making at the local level and have the local communities or the local actors decide on the priorities. You know, as the fund has championed direct access and enhanced direct access, it's not as easy as it sounds. And there needs to be quite a bit of capacity building and support for the local actors so that they are able to first understand the climate risk, understand what the impact means for them and the challenges coming in the future, and decide as to what the best actions. And I think that this is a very important point that has also been raised to us as well as we move towards LLA. And I think that is not simply a manner of channeling the funding, but also what additional support so that that funding is used to the best and for effective measures. Yeah, and we have a number of safeguards in terms of ensuring that vulnerable and marginalized groups are involved in the consultations and that their voices are heard, that voices from specific group, disabled women, youth, and so on are also heard. So we work at various levels, but I really wanted to plug in that it's not that easy and it's not simply a matter of channeling the funding. Not sure if anyone wants to follow.
Maybe just to add, no, definitely that is not an easy task. We had embedded into our RISA portfolio, and we have a QR code here. You can also scan it afterwards. Basically, the principle, of course, that while you go along and do your environmental social management plan for any interventions within your project, you also empower your local communities and local government to be able to actually run the mitigation strategies themselves. So, for example, in Cambodia, there was a lot of like seawater intrusion, and therefore a lot of the fertile land went or is salinated. So there had to be different water gates reinstalled and nature-based solutions put in place, but to monitor them over time and to make sure that they are growing and the gray infrastructure that comes within is channeled and monitored, and local communities know when to open, when to close certain channels. We had to do it with them together, and that's like where also the capacity building comes in. You do it in a participatory way, has much more sustainability because the community knows why they're closing certain gates at what time and what are the indicators to know, oh, this is actually going to flood us because weather situations are X, Y, Z. So early warning systems were in place for that certain project, for example. The capacity building was in place. And then we realized what would be really nice actually is if there are these learnings reflected in a more broader tool and an online course or in a self-paced course. So Unhabitat has designed a 9-module strong urban EBA tool and course, and it has 3 layers. You can either ask us to facilitate it in person, and we do so. You can ask us to do it hybridly, and we do so, or you can access it online on our platform and then basically see in your planning process, how do you actually integrate urban EBA? Just as a food for thought.
Do you wanna-
Very difficult to fantastic answer. But anyway, but to be honest, what we can we Japanese government share is I think a later stage because as they explained, capacity building is important, institutional arrangement is important to grasp their needs precisely is important. But I think yeah, the stage where we can introduce technologies after this stage, I guess. So what I noticed and I thought from their intervention is, yeah, we should carefully follow what they are doing and learn and provide appropriate technologies to such a local community. Thank you.
That's a good one.
If everyone would please help me give a round of applause to our panelists. We appreciate it very much. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Ambassador Diane Black-Lane, Director of Department of Environment of Antigua and Barbuda. And for comments, I know you've been tied up in negotiations, so thanks for making the time to join us. And we'll take the audience and you can take the stage.
Thank you. Hello, morning, everybody. I apologize for being late. It's that time of the negotiations where a lot of surprises come at, well, it's not a surprise anymore, but you know, you never know. Right, so thank you so much for inviting me here. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Diane Black-Lane. I'm from Antigua and Barbuda. I'm the Director of the Department of the Environment and Ambassador of Climate Change for my country. My department is also accredited to the Adaptation Fund. We're a big fan of enhanced direct access. And of course, we're the Department of the Environment, so we're a big fan of EBA. So as with respect to the negotiations and the hope that more funding will go towards this, I think that is really positive. But I think at the country level, the recipient country level, there's a lot of work to be done. And our colleagues from the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF sometimes can't say exactly what has to be done because they have to be extremely diplomatic, right? Yes. So developing countries and recipient countries are not prepared to accept the funds that is provided. And so it takes a long time to ensure that you roll out the projects and you design the projects the way that even the convention is requesting. Because the amount of money that we're getting in the climate finance architecture is only 1% of what is there, 1%. So the next 2 days, we are all fighting over text to talk about 1% of this money that has to compete with over $1 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies. So this is not a Goliath and David situation. Just think of something bigger. These are like the gods of fossil fuel fighting the peasants of, you know, somewhere else. So what do you do in this fight? And so the other thing that you could do is to sort of be more strategic in how you spend the funds and where would you find your adaptation interventions. So I remember when we joined the Adaptation Fund, it was just about adaptation. And then all of a sudden you're getting hit by Category 5 hurricane and the floods are coming and they're coming, 1 in 100-year event is occurring every 2 years or every year somewhere in the world. So all of a sudden the adaptation money that you have just is so insignificant. And I think this is a moment for many countries to step back and think, okay, what do I do? What is the best way to use these funds? And I think we are not there yet. We're still doing important adaptation project in the context of none of these extreme weather events happening so frequently. Those are great adaptation projects. But right now you have to pick projects in anticipation that can reduce the impacts of floods and rains. But that is not what we're seeing from countries. The projects moving forward are not necessarily the best projects. And I say congratulations to our Adaptation Fund team. I know I'm a member of the Green Climate Fund board, and they look at the projects and they're like, but it's a good project, but you know, is it this the best though? But countries want the priorities, the way the priorities are set is not necessarily set in a structured way to reduce the impacts of extreme weather events. There are many, many other considerations, and a lot of it is poverty, a lot of it is development, and you see countries trying to balance the funding for both. And if one city gets funding and the next doesn't get funding, of course, but the city that's getting the funding is the one who is going to block all the water from coming down to the other city. People don't understand until the floods come, until the hurricanes come. And so there's a lot of dynamics in each of the country that you'll have to work with. And of course, once the event happens, the Adaptation Fund cannot step in, the GCF cannot step in. And so, I mean, we're going through a difficult time where many countries have to come to the realization that the small amount of money that they have now cannot be used for the fun projects that you want to do, but it would have to be the projects that you really and truly need to do. How do you pick that? In Antigua and Barbuda, we pick the one that will cause us we follow our insurance companies. What do the insurance think is the highest risk? We call them up and said, flooding in this community, you can't get insurance in this community or that community, and that is where we put the money. It's as simple as that. We go to the private sector, it's like where these people want to make money, and you can call them for whatever they are, but they have a nose for risk. So let's see which project run the risk. And this is something that we would suggest to all countries and to all of the funds who are there now to just follow the insurance companies and see where they go and encourage countries, if you can, to design projects around that. And I would just like to say that our project for the Adaptation Fund, we designed it before the Category 5 came and so on. And we finally implemented it with all the struggles that we had. We use old design, old technology design from the old folks, old engineers from the colonial days. And as soon as we are finished, we'd even paint it properly, down came the rains and hardly any flooding. So we're really grateful that we chose that, yeah. So we're really grateful that we chose that project, but this was not the project the government wanted, but this was the project the community wanted. And so to get the project that you want, you have to be, just like at COP, you have to be prepared to fight for it and make the case for it. And this is what we did. And now the government finally, I have to go back home because the rains came 2 weeks before I came here. I really am going to ask them, I told you so moment. I'm going to take that moment on and enjoy myself. I said, I told you so. And so I think that is what we're doing. And I encourage everybody else to do that, because that, unfortunately, this is where we're at now. It's a loss and damage time, unfortunately, and adaptation is going to just, even though you double the amount of money for adaptation, it's nothing. So hope is not there. Hope is in the mitigation. The best adaptation is mitigation, and mitigate like you're crazy. And so this is what we do. This is how we design our project. This is how we structure our projects. And so far they've been doing well. So anytime I get an opportunity to speak at these events, I will say so, because when we had our Category 5 hurricane, all of these international NGOs who humanitarian come in to help us, and they worked really well. And I swore to myself, the next time they come back here to Antigua is to go and have fun on the beach. They will not be coming out here to have to help us get back on our feet, and we will help people get back on their feet. So thank you very much. And any opportunity I have to speak about that, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, government leaders, thanks non-government leaders, thanks private sector leaders. We appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining us this morning.